webinar series. Our webinar today is about privacy and data protection. Our presenters are all from ICANN.org. We have with us today Brian Gutterman, Paul Muchene, and Yazid Akanho. Their bios are linked to the agenda and to the wiki page, so feel free to check them out. With this, I welcome you all and welcome our presenters and hand it over to Brian. Brian, please begin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Gutterman, and I am with ICANN.org. First off, thank you for having Paul and Yazid and I here with you today for this, I guess it's the first of this iteration of AFRALO's 2022 webinar series. Good evening, and thank you for joining to everybody in Africa in particular. I know it's late in the day or in the evening for many of you. So thank you for spending this part of your day with us. And I hope this is an interesting session for everybody, and we hope to make it interactive as well. I'm going to try and speak slowly for the French interpreters, for everybody participating on the French channel. So Michelle, next slide, please. Let's go through the agenda quickly. So Paul and I will both be speaking. And the topic for today is privacy and data protection. And we understand this is a huge topic. It depends which way you want to go, under the umbrella of privacy and data protection. But we're going to try and cover at least a sliver of it and what we think are some important topics today. So one of the programs that I work on for ICANN.org is the Registrar program, which is a program that tries to do a lot of sort of capacity building in education for domain name registrants, domain name holders, about their rights and responsibilities, best practices for registering, managing, protecting their domain name. So that's stuff I'm going to be talking about today, which is a part of sort of what I'll get into more, and what I want to speak to coming up here is a response to the excellent and I think really important ICANN 73 statement from AFRALO, the joint statement of AFRALO and AFRICAN, that I think was just formally sent over to the ICANN board recently. So again, thank you for that important work. And that statement calls for sort of increased capacity building when it comes to for end users and DNS abuse. And again, that's another huge topic of DNS abuse, which I think will probably be covered in other webinars, but we're going to cover a little bit of that today, and I'll tell you more about that. So we're going to talk about responsible domain name registration and management, domain name management best practices, protecting domain names, and a lot of that is to try and speak to end users, which is what obviously ALAC and AFRALO really care about the most. Is it's something I'll emphasize throughout the presentation, is that having ensuring that domain name administrators, managers are responsibly and sort of actively managing their domain names. This goes a long way into protecting end users who are accessing this content, so they know that what they're accessing is accurate. If they log into somebody else's website, if they give their information to somebody else's website, that this is going to be secure, and everybody's following the rules when it comes to online sort of agreements and things like that. So all of this, is that we're going to talk about in the end, leads to sort of protecting end users who are accessing the content, online. So we'll talk more about that. And then Paul, who is from the technical engagement team, you'll hear more about Paul later. He's going to talk in a little more technical way about security considerations and best practices, DNSSEC, some about DNS privacy, and then we'll have some time for takeaways and questions and answers. So next slide, please, Michelle. So again, I know maybe not all of you were involved in developing this statement or signing on to it, but we thought it was important to call out here the AFRALO ICANN 73 statement about DNS abuse and increasing capacity about development for end users around being aware of DNS abuse and how it relates to end users. So next slide, please. And since I come from the registrant program at ICANN.org, this is something we like to emphasize, but I think something that's important to call out to this group, and is that registrants themselves have a role to play in the broader ecosystem of protecting end users from DNS abuse, different forms of DNS abuse. It's not just the registrants, it's everybody in the ecosystem. It's the contracted parties, registrars, registries, CCTLD managers, web hosting companies, everybody involved in the DNS ecosystem has a role to play, but so do domain name registrants. So what we encourage registrants always is to be just proactive, have a clear line of communication with your registrar to make sure you're securely and responsibly managing a domain name, because doing a lot of these little things that I'm going to talk about will go a long way in preventing something bad from happening, real abuse that can impact not only the domain name holder and their domain name, but end users as well who are accessing this content. So next slide, please. Again, domain names, sometimes you might have one yourselves. I'm speaking to those in the audience now or to those listening to the recording later on, but maybe, you work for a company that has a domain name, you have a small business, your friends or family might have a blog. So sometimes you can get it for very cheap, but it turns into a valuable asset. The more you use it, the more people that are connecting to it. Even if you buy it for only $10, you register it for a little bit of money, it can become a very valuable asset that a lot of people are depending on. So this is why, again, we recommend that people really manage them with care. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the industry, a few of the actors I just mentioned right now, but just trying to give a picture of how the whole industry and ecosystem, who are sort of responsible for, all of you as end users, or you may be a registrant, you may work for one of these companies if you're in the industry yourselves. They have a role to play in end users accessing domain names in the end. Next slide, please. So this is at the beginning, is sort of the cycle, and the graphic you see on the right here. These are things to think about even before you register a domain name. So maybe you have an idea for a business, you want to start a blog, you have lots of options of where to start, what to do when you register a domain name. So just quickly, a couple of the tips that we always like to give for those considering registering a domain name and becoming a domain name holder, a domain name registrant. We recommend one, dealing with an ICANN accredited registrar. And the link is there in the slide, but you can easily find, the full list of ICANN accredited registrars online. Do a little research also before on your registrar's customer service. So how easy is it for you to get in touch with your registrar. How quickly are they going to answer questions that you might have? If something comes up, how quickly are they going to respond, so you can keep your domain name up and running? And then, if when you decide which registrar you want to register from or a reseller, really read and understand the terms and conditions before you click, I agree, and you sign on to that agreement before registering, because there's, oftentimes small print, but that small print is important. So next slide, please. A few best practices. As I go through these best practices, you'll notice that many of them are specifically for domain name registrants. But as I go through these best practices, a lot of the tips you'll notice that for anybody, anybody who is accessing content online, making online accounts, when we talk about passwords and things like that later on, these are sort of helpful tips for anybody to think about before as end users when you are going online using the DNS to think about. So specifically for registrants, keep the contact information associated with your domain name registration up to date at all times. And why is that? That seems self-explanatory. Well, you might register with one email or phone number or something like that, and then a couple of years later, when you need help, maybe you change that. But if your registrar doesn't have the up-to-date information about how to contact you, they could have a hard time doing that. Keep track of expiration dates. Again, sometimes you might register and you don't think about it for a long time, and you won't realize that it expired, that registration. And then a lot of bad things can happen if you let that expiration date hit. So just keep in mind and be proactive and renew that domain name well before the expiration date. You can consider an auto renew option, and keep out for renewal reminders, which you will get from your registrar prior to expiration. But keep an eye out for that. Next slide, please. Know who your registrar is, and this seems again like obvious, but we hear a lot, from our internal compliance department about registrants who reach out to us saying, well, I don't even know who my registrar is. Maybe somebody else registered it, and then the management or administration of the domain name got passed on to somebody else. So make sure you know who that registrar is. And again, make sure you know how to keep in contact with them. So use the lookup tool. You can do that to find out who your registrar is. The link is there. And if you still can't figure out who that registrar is and who to contact with an issue, you can reach out to ICANN's global support team, or submit a complaint to ICANN compliance. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit more about protecting your domain names, a little bit more about the security side. Next slide, please. So protecting the domain name, it's, as I've said, it's a valuable asset. So manage it with care. And on this slide, there's a few tips that are specific for domain name management. But when you get into these, the third three bullets here, things like check the sender's email address and phone number to ensure it's legitimate. So sometimes you can get an email from someone that looks a little bit fishy. If you haven't seen it before, take a minute and look out for things like suspicious links or language in that email. And this is, again, more so for protecting against phishing attacks. But these are things that everybody can think about when they're online or using email. Be suspicious of things like emails that are asking for immediate payments or requesting banking information. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a bit of, again, more targeted at domain name holders. But again, I want to emphasize that, as I go through these best practices or tips, think about your work colleagues that sort of manage domain names. That might be important to your business, whoever you work for, your friends and your family who have presences online. These are all important things to think about. Couple of tips here: register with an email address that is not connected to your domain name. So there might be a quiz later. So here's, so I want you to listen to this and remember this. That might sound a little bit weird. To register with an email address that is not connected to your domain name registration as a registrant. Here's why. If your domain name is hijacked or transferred unauthorized by someone who has gained access to your account somehow with the registrar, through abuse and malicious activity, it's a criminal activity, that person oftentimes might alter the registration information to remove you as the registered holder of the domain name. So if you use an email address that is not associated with your domain name, you should be able to provide that email address as evidence to your registrar when we're investigating this. That you were indeed the registered holder of the domain name before it was altered or transferred without your consent. Next slide, please. Thank you. Create a strong, unique password and do not share this password. Again, this goes for everybody out there who might be, this goes for domain name holders and registrants, but also others who have online accounts, whether that's, online banking, online services, DoorDash or whatever, e-commerce sites. These services are unfortunately compromised frequently, and having a strong and unique password that only mitigates the risk of something bad happening and somebody accessing your password and then taking over your account. Next slide, please. Some more technical tips: inquire about multi-step authentication. And just a more general tip is to check the email accounts associated with your domain names. But this goes for other online accounts frequently. So if you have multiple email addresses, make sure that you're actively checking these accounts for notifications, renewal notices, and things like that from whether it's your registrar or another business that you're subscribed to for some reason. Just so you're getting these notifications and you're staying vigilant to prevent bad things from happening. Next slide, please. This is more for registrants. There's something called the transfer lock that you can ask. This is sort of extra protection that you can ask your registrar about. And then again, a more general tip, for all end users. And this is something that, I think it's important. I know ALAC talks about this a lot with its community at external events. It's about being responsible and smart with your online behavior. Just, finding that balance, to be cautious about any links that you're clicking in emails, attachments that you're opening, and with websites you visit. We want everybody to use this, great thing. It's the internet, but use it in a responsible way and use it responsibly and be smart and teach your friends and family about this as well. So next slide, please. Okay, a little bit more specifically about phishing. I'm sure many of you know what phishing is, but just quickly there, it's a type of fraud that cyber criminals utilize to lure others online. And this can include registrants, but it can be anybody into doing, what a criminal would want them to do. Phishing, unfortunately, can, lead, a successful phishing attack can lead to end users or to registrants themselves to giving away their username and passwords. Sometimes they can click on a link that will lead their devices to being infected with malware and other bad things. So we want to stay away from phishing attacks. If an attacker can access registrants' private domain name registration information and passwords, they can potentially redirect the domain to wherever they want. And this can lead to a lot of harm to end users, obviously, to whoever is used to accessing that content at that domain name. Next slide, please. A little bit more about phishing scams and things to think about. This is also, again, very pertinent for anybody, end users who get a suspicious email. So sometimes they can claim these phishing emails that your domain name registration needs to be renewed, and then you might have to pay some sort of fee to get it back. This is similar to other online accounts that you might have as an end user. They use deceptive techniques, and they oftentimes, ask for specific information, or they ask you to click a link again, or open a file that can lead to a lot of harm down the road. Sometimes even, unfortunately for ICANN, phishing emails and scams can appear to come from ICANN. But it's important to know, not just for registrants, but for everybody, that ICANN will not send emails directly to registrants about things like managing their domain names, and we will never request payment of fees from registrants or anybody else. Next slide, please. So again, sort of quick review, carefully review every email you receive. Be suspicious of any email or web page from ICANN. Because as we just said, you will not get one from ICANN about this stuff directly. You will get information about your domain name from your registrar. Next slide. Again, finally, it's a few measures for additional protection. ICANN won't ever send registrants what's called the WDRP, the Who Is Data Reminder Policy Notice that registrants will get once a year from their registrar. Again, if you receive an email about your domain that purports to come from ICANN, be sure to contact your registrar directly. And that's kind of a general tip, that if you have any issues or problems, first go to your registrar and make sure you have a clear line of communication with them, because they should be the one to help you. And next slide. Okay, I've gotten to the end of my first portion here of the webinar. And now I think it's, Michelle, or how are we gonna run this quiz?
Okay, we have a poll set up, so you can go ahead and launch the poll, and you just let me know when you'd like to close it. So I'll go ahead and launch it now.
Okay, let's launch the poll. Okay, I'll quickly read through the question. It's three choices, A, B, or C. When registering a domain name and creating a username and password associated with an email address for managing the domain name, what are some best practices to follow? Is it A, the first choice? Use the same email address you use to register the domain name and create a short and simple password that's easy to remember. Use a different email address than you use to register the domain name and create a password associated with maybe your birthday that you can easily share with friends and family to let them know what it is too. Or use a different email address than you use to register the domain name and create a strong and unique password. And don't share that with others. So let's take, I don't know, a minute here. Hopefully you can all fill out the poll. And okay, last chance, take a thought. Okay, I think we can stop the poll. Yeah, we need the music. You're right, Glenn.
Okay. One moment. I'll go ahead and end the poll. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Sharing the results.
Okay, I think we did good. We did good. I see 86% of us got the question correct. So the answer is use a different email address than you use to register the domain name and create a strong and unique password, and do not share it with others. So great work, everybody. Now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And I will be now passing on the microphone to my colleague, Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Brian, and a warm welcome to everyone. As Brian has already told you, my name is Paul Mosheni. I work with the ICANN office of the CTO, Octo, and I'm going to talk about security considerations and best practices. How I'm going to approach this topic for the rest of the presentation is I'm going to talk holistically about the DNS ecosystem. As Brian has already walked you through, he's walked you through domain name protection, and also how you as an end user should be vigilant in actually determining and protecting a domain name. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the problems that the DNS ecosystem faces, and what security measures are in place. And also we'll talk at the end about DNS privacy, and I'll tackle the issue of how privacy is actually being protected, or attempts are being made to protect the privacy of DNS queries. So next slide. So let's start a little bit about the DNS. So we've had the DNS since 1983. And in the last nearly 40 years, there've been quite a lot of problems with the DNS in terms of security. And this is because the DNS was initially created to actually be a replacement for actually a translation that was done by a text file known as a host.txt. So the implementers of DNS at that time did not think about security. Security was not so much a big consideration. But over time, a lot of security, vulnerabilities have been discovered, and I'll explain them. So let's start off on the left-hand side. So over there, you see a stub and a recursive resolver. So a stub is basically a piece of software that it runs on your device, such as your mobile phone, or even your laptop. So if you actually wanted to go to a website like whatsapp.com or instagram.com, the application checks the stub and actually then sends the query to a recursive resolver, which is basically a piece of hardware or server in an ISP. Increasingly today, the recursive resolvers are in the public cloud. So there's a problem between this layer, and that is there's a possibility that a man in the middle or information exfiltration could occur. And that is one vulnerability in this layer. Then behind the scenes, between the recursive resolver and now the authoritative name servers. So the authoritative name servers are now DNS servers that actually answer queries. So they actually answer queries and provide those answers to the recursive resolver, which then provides to the end user who has a cache, who has a stub running on their device. So between the recursive resolver and the authoritative name server, there's a possibility that information could actually be spoofed or even corrupted. And at the same time, even within the recursive resolver, there's a possibility of actually cache poisoning. That basically means an attacker can gain access and inject, fraudulent resolutions between a domain name and the IP address or directly into the recursive resolver. So such that when an end user actually maybe requests for perhaps a site like ican.org, it doesn't go to the legitimate website, ican.org, but instead it goes to maybe a website that's controlled by an attacker. So that's what the cache poisoning attack does. Then let's also look at the background. So what about an end user who is maybe registering a domain on a website? On the web in its own right has various vulnerabilities. We'll not talk about the web vulnerabilities, including vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, which basically means that an attacker can actually hijack perhaps your activity online and actually redirect you to maybe some malicious site. And between also the web interface and now the registry and the registrar, there's a possibility of also a man in the middle or exfiltration. Between the registry and the registrar, when an end user actually wants to transfer their domains, they usually rely on a protocol known as the Extensible Provisioning Protocol, or EPP. And if an attacker gains access to this EPP credentials, they can actually transfer the domain to their own registrar and therefore compromise your domain name. So these are some of the potential vulnerabilities that have over time been detected in the DNS. This is not the end. This is not exhaustive. I know security researchers are still looking at more, but let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that you should understand is that the DNS is actually a rich target of, vector for attacks. And this is because it has a wide surface. It's globally distributed. And any part of the DNS can actually be, is actually a target, or it is fair game for some attackers. And so there have been some means to actually, or ways to actually try and defend and actually protect the DNS from some of the attacks that I've just mentioned in the previous slide. If you look at the recursive resolver, which is basically the server that is on the ISP side or on the public cloud, they could actually conduct various activities and such as access controls and limiting the amount of queries that actually get to them. Okay, so if we look at now the authoritative name servers, by actually having greater redundancy, that is basically you don't just have one authoritative name server, you have perhaps a couple or many using technology such as Anycast. You can actually distribute your recursive, your authoritative name servers in different jurisdictions such that they are not going to be vulnerable to perhaps maybe a DDoS attack. This is exactly how the root servers actually work. This is how they're distributed globally using Anycast. Then I'll talk a little bit about DNSSEC in the next section. We'll talk a little bit on what it does. I'll also talk a little bit about DOH, DNS over HTTPS, and DNS over TLS, and how they're actually used to actually provide privacy. Finally, there are also ways that if you're perhaps maybe running your own zone, maybe you're an end user or you're a network operator, you could actually use certain, authentication mechanisms such as transaction signatures. And this is zone transfer, XFR over TLS, which are specified in RFCs 8945 and 9103. This mechanism is basically, I'll just summarize them. The mechanisms which allow maybe your client to actually authenticate with a DNS server and be able to actually send queries or even transfer your zone data securely, and you can actually verify that. So let's go to the next slide. So another thing also to note is besides just only specific mechanisms for defending the DNS, like I mentioned in the previous slide, operational security practices also go hand in hand. So operational security practices are the usual security practices, some of which Brian has mentioned, such as applying patches and updates to your software or to your DNS software. And other than that, also making sure that your password is actually pretty, can I say, it's a strong password, enforcing regular password checks and changes, maybe enforcing a policy such that your password should be of a certain length and it has to have a variation of characters. Enforcing also multi-factor authentication if you are perhaps accessing very critical systems. And maybe, and also limiting privileges to users such that only trusted users have certain rights to certain systems. So next slide. So besides passwords management, other things that could be done is ensure the integrity of the DNS data is actually verified by also checking the logs. But I also talk about DNSSEC, how DNSSEC actually does this. And if you're running an email, let's just call it server, there are certain mechanisms that you can use. You can actually use a DNS for this. One of which is the domain-based message authentication, reporting and conformance, DMARC, and domain keys identity mail. So what this do, I'll just give a nutshell what they do. So DMARC and DKIM basically they actually add signatures to every email you send, such that basically the recipient of an email can be able to tell or confirm that this email is legitimate. It's not actually a phished email. These signatures are actually invisible. They're not seen by the sender or by the sender. It's actually the prerogative of the email system to check the signatures and be able to actually confirm that these signatures are valid. So this is actually done in the background, but these two mechanisms are used to ensure that whatever email is coming from a certain origin, that origin is valid and it is not fraudulent. It's not being actually phished. So next slide. Okay, so let's talk about how DNSSEC is used to protect DNS data. So next slide. So for those of you, I'll just who may be curious to know about what is DNSSEC. DNSSEC stands for Domain Name System Security Extensions. It is actually a protocol that is actually used to secure not the entire DNS, but a certain, can I say, portion of the DNS, and that is the integrity of DNS data. So DNSSEC does this by actually using cryptography, public key cryptography, and at the same time, it's actually a protocol that has taken some considerable time to actually develop. So it took around nearly 20 years. First of all, in the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, it was first of all proposed around 1993, but it was only standardized in 2005. And in 2005, 3 documents were actually released by the IETF. And these were RFCs 4033, 4034, and 4035. Full disclosure, 2 of my colleagues in Octo were actually the co-authors of the 3 documents. That is Matt Larson and Roy Ahrens. They actually specified the protocol in these documents. And there was actually one added a little later, that is RFC 5155. So these documents, they're publicly available. I think Yazid can share the links with you if you would like to read them in your spare time. They're pretty interesting technical documents on how the entire DNSSEC actually functions. Next slide. So let's actually disabuse a few things. What does DNSSEC do and what it cannot do? So first and foremost, DNSSEC is actually used to protect the integrity of DNS data. So what do I mean by integrity? Integrity means that the data, the stub or the end user is getting is actually can be checked that it is valid, that it is not been spoofed, it has not been tampered with. This is what DNSSEC is very, this is the strength of DNSSEC. How does it do this? So DNSSEC actually tries to address two questions. One, did this response that actually came from a domain name such as example.com, is it actually from example.com? That's the first question. And this is the question of data origin authenticity. And then it also tries to address another question. Was this data modified? Was the DNS queries or perhaps the mapping of a domain name to IP address, or conversely, was it actually modified? And this is the issue of integrity. So DNSSEC actually addresses this too. And it uses cryptography and digital signatures to actually address these two questions. So DNSSEC offers protection against spoofing of DNS data, and that is, you can actually tell if data, if a DNS queries or the responses have actually been, have been tampered with. I will talk about how this is done in a few slides. So, but DNSSEC does not address the following. So one, it does not provide confidentiality. So for example, it's still possible for a man in the middle to actually see the queries you're sending and the responses being received. The only thing that the attacker will see is basically that the responses that you're receiving are actually been signed. They have cryptographic signatures attached to them. But it'll be difficult to actually change those signatures unless maybe they are able to actually, maybe they actually are able to compromise now the name server, the authoritative name servers, and perhaps recreate the signatures again. So that's the one thing. So when it comes to confidentiality and also privacy, we look at DOH and DOT in subsequent slides. And then the other thing is DNSSEC does not address attacks, certain attacks such as DDoS attacks. In fact, DNSSEC actually amplifies DDoS attacks. I'll explain why. So basically, when you actually send a query from your device to perhaps an authoritative name server, the authoritative name server will provide the answer to the resolver, and the resolver will then provide the answer to you, and that answer is actually with respect to signatures on it. So the problem is that a single query sent from a device, which is small in size, will actually be accompanied by a response which is much larger. It's a much larger packet because it has much more data added to it, including the signatures. So because of this, certain attackers have actually leveraged the use of DNSSEC to send queries to flood perhaps a given resolver, and the resolver actually sends those responses perhaps to a victim, and those with very huge, with big packets. So DNSSEC actually, in a way, can be used to leverage DDoS, but there are other ways to protect against DDoS that DNSSEC doesn't. And one of them is actually specified in a document by the IETF known as the Best Current Practice 38. So BCP 38 just tells network operators how they can actually filter bogus packets given an origin. So how to filter that and prevent flooding of their network. So next slide. Okay, so DNSSEC works very interestingly. So for those of you who may have followed the root signing ceremonies, so as ICANN, we actually administer the root zone using through the IANA functions, and I think it is thrice every year there is actually a key signing ceremony. So the idea is basically the root zone has been signed since July 2010. And the whole idea of the chain of trust is actually to build, to verify the integrity of DNS data starting from the root zone all the way down the DNS hierarchy to the subsequent zone. So for example, let's take example.com. So if you're going to verify that example.com is valid and has been signed, you're going to actually get the signatures from the root zone, check them that they are actually valid. Then you'll go to the .com zone and then check that those signatures are also valid. Then you'll go to example.com and you'll check now the entire signatures are valid. So this is a chain of trust where you start from the root zone, going to the top level domain, the second level domain, and so on. So DNSSEC works by actually using this chain of trust mechanism where validation takes place from the highest point of the DNS hierarchy to the root zone to the lowest level of the DNS hierarchy, which it could be a second, third, or fourth level domain. Next slide. And this brings me to the very interesting topic on DNSSEC validation. So there's been quite a lot of discussion in various constituencies within ICANN on DNSSEC validation. So DNSSEC is basically, I did not clarify this, but DNSSEC involves two activities. One is the signing. So the signing is done by various parties. It could be done by registrars, registries, even end users. Actually, when they register a domain, they could actually request, they could actually even turn on or sign their domain using DNSSEC. But then validation is a bit different. Validation takes place on now the network operator part, and this is the resolver section. And this actually involves checking the signatures. So once you've already signed your zone, there needs to be a way to verify those signatures are not fraudulent. So how is this done? This is actually the whole idea of validation, and validation takes place mainly on the ISP side, on the recursive resolver side. And usually validation actually borrows from the chain of trust. So validation takes place by checking the root, the signatures from the root, then the corresponding top level domain down to the subsequent level domain. And if validation actually fails, basically an end user will not be able to proceed because the resolver has detected that maybe the signatures are invalid or there's something utterly wrong with them. So go to the next slide. And so this is just basically the whole idea of validation. So what happens is a resolver gets the signatures from the various, from the chain of trust, from either the root zone, the top level domain, or the second level domain. It then actually performs its own operation by actually taking the data it has received, encrypting it, and producing its own signatures and comparing the signatures it has received with the ones it has generated. And if everything goes well, validation is successful. And if validation fails, it tells the end user, sorry, this domain is, there's an error here, so you cannot proceed. So basically that's how DNSSEC validation works. Next slide. Okay, so in summary, DNSSEC is used to achieve authenticity and integrity of DNS data. And it allows various parties, including end users, to cryptographically sign their DNS data. And also it allows DNS operators, that is not operators, to actually check the signatures that it has received from the various authoritative name servers. And finally, DNSSEC is used to actually provide assurances to end users that the DNS data that they're receiving is actually valid and true. So in a way, it helps to address the issue that has been discussed heatedly, but not all of it. But DNSSEC is one tool that can be used to actually tackle the issue of DNS threats and abuses. Next slide. Okay, so this now is what can you do? So maybe you would like to, you are interested in actually DNSSEC. So how would you go about it? So there are various ways you can go about it as an end user, or perhaps maybe if you're a registrar or registry joining us, or even a network operator. So for contracted parties, currently, that is registrars, especially registries, ICANN contracted parties, those who actually actually run top-level domains, they have to actually sign the top-level domains with DNSSEC. So currently, all the generic top-level domains have been signed with DNSSEC. For registrars, it's a bit different. Some registrars, they actually offer end users to sign their domain names by the click of a button. So you don't even need to actually worry yourself about, the actual process of generating the keys, managing them. They actually do this for you. You just only enable it by clicking of a button. Other users, they tend to do it the hard way, or can I say they love it. They'll actually run their own zone. They will sign it. They will upload the keys to now the various registries and so on. If you're a financial institution or company, you could actually take the step of signing your domain name. And if you're running your own resolver, you could actually turn on DNSSEC validation. Likewise, ISPs can turn on DNSSEC validation. It's important, I just also clarify that the process of validation or even configuring an infrastructure to validate is much easier than actually the idea of signing. So validation is a bit more straightforward and easier than signing. And various software vendors, the DNS software vendors, actually by default now enable DNSSEC validation to run out of the box. For governments and policymakers, they could encourage DNSSEC compliance. We're seeing increasingly this happening, especially in the EU and also in the United States, where certain policies are encouraging network operators and even institutions to maybe enable DNSSEC in some of the products and services. And for end users, you could actually approach a registrar that actually provides DNSSEC by default. At the same time, you could maybe request your ISP to actually turn on validation, though this really depends on the ISP in question. I should note that many public open resolvers, especially have DNSSEC validation turned on. So basically, you could check if there's a way to check this using the dig command, although I'll not talk about that now. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is now going to be the part maybe you've been anticipating. So let's look at the issue of privacy. So how is privacy actually handled in the DNS? Well, go to the next slide. So it's very interesting. Until recently, until let's say before 2016, most of the resolution taking place was done on end user devices, was done on the stubs. But increasingly, the browser has now become a focal point for actually doing actual, can I say, encryption, and also conducting certain translations. So we are moving away from stub to the browser. And this has not made certain people happy. Even in the IETF, there's a big debate about whether it's a good idea to actually do DNS, can I say, DNS translation or DNS on a browser instead of the stub. And it's very interesting that because of this, two technologies were actually introduced to enable browsers to actually conduct, can I say DNS encryption. So let's go to the next slide. So, in 2016, the IETF published a document known as RFC 7858, which is DNS over TLS. And then 2 years later, in 2018, DNS over HTTPS was actually published. There are also other ways to actually encrypt DNS queries between the stub resolver, between the stub and the recursive resolver, and one of those is through DNS script. The only thing is that DNS script has not been standardized by the IETF, though it is actually commonly used and it's open source, but it's not been standardized. However, how these two technologies differ is that DOT actually is very interesting. So what happens is your device actually creates an encrypted connection with the server. The encrypted connection is similar to what you see in it allows basically the client device, your device, to send now DNS queries to the server through that encrypted connection over port 853. So basically what this means is an attacker who wants to know what queries you're sending find it hard because they'll need to figure out or break the encryption between now the channel that is between your device and also the server. So that is basically how DNS or TLS works. DOH is a bit differently. So DOH actually works together with web traffic. So when you go to perhaps a secure website, you actually see the lock on the browser. So DOH allows you to send not just web traffic, but also DNS queries over that encrypted connection on your web browser. And so it commingles DNS queries with web traffic, and it actually uses the HTTPS protocol. So this has actually raised some very big, interesting concerns, both technical and policy-wise. From the technical point of view, network administrators and operators find it much harder to filter certain traffic and also to actually monitor perhaps their network for perhaps maybe malicious traffic, because DNS queries are being commingled with also legitimate web traffic. So that has created a headache for network operators. On the policy side of things, although I'll not discuss this, there are certain jurisdictions that have actually raised concerns over DOH, and that's because they have maybe certain statutory requirements to actually filter DNS queries. So when you send DNS queries now over HTTPS, this has actually caused some jurisdictions to feel that the DOH has circumvented some of the statutory requirements. So, go to the next slide. But generally, from ICANN's point of view, and all this is articulated in Octo 003, which maybe my colleague Yazid could share with you. In the document, we stated basically that generally data privacy is good for end users. It's important for end users to actually be assured that that there's no third party or prying third party that has access maybe to their DNS queries. Encrypting DNS traffic does protect end users and observers from on-path attacks. And also it prevents attackers from altering responses. And it does actually help to improve on the security of DNS in a similar way. Though we also note that there are also major concerns, both by maybe network operators and also certain, can I say, jurisdictions over the fact that DNS of HTTPS particularly can also be abused by even malicious attackers. At the same time, also it also circumvents certain statutory requirements in those jurisdictions. So I'll not talk about the policy implications, but it would be interesting. You could actually check out Octo 003 and read for yourself on the local and intent policy implications of encrypted DNS. Next slide. Okay, so as an end user, if you wanted to maybe test or play around with DOH, there are certain ways you can do this. So Mozilla was one of the first, can I say, organizations to actually embed DOH in the Firefox browser. Currently, it is not enabled by default. You have to go to the settings and actually activate it. Similarly, Google does support through their Chrome browser and also through their public DNS service called 8.8.8. They do support DOH, and you can activate it on the Chrome browser. Other than that, the Brave and the Apple Safari browser also support DOH, and also other browsers I've not mentioned here. I think also Opera and others some are working on the pipeline in order to support DOH as a feature on their browsers. Okay, so next slide. But DOH and DOT are not the only ways of actually ensuring privacy or protecting DNS queries. Network operators can actually, especially recursive resolver operators, can actually deploy two other techniques, one of which is QNAME minimization, that's described in RFC 7816. So QNAME minimization basically is like this. It says that, okay, the resolver has received a DNS query from an end user. The resolver will have to inquire for the correct, can I say, resolution from an authoritative name server. But instead of providing the whole query like www.example.com, it just provides a portion of the query. So it'll just send .com to the recursive to the authoritative name server. Then the next string just perhaps just example.com. So in this way, by just sending just only a portion of the query to the authoritative name server, QNAME minimization prevents an attacker from actually surmising or guessing what the entire query an end user was actually wanted to send. So QNAME minimization is one way in which this is done. The other one is aggressive DNSSEC caching, which is described in RFC 8198. So this is basically means that any responses that cannot be resolved, that is non-existent queries, they're actually cached such that anyone, if an attacker wanted to actually send that query again and again and again to the recursive resolve will just respond not found and so on. So it avoids sending new queries to an authoritative name server that are non-existent, and this way you prevent also the issue, or you also prevent the issue of flooding the authoritative name server with bogus requests. So those are just two ways that network operators can deploy in order to improve on privacy safeguards. Next slide. Okay, so this actually brings me to the end of the portion of my presentation. And this is just a quiz. We'll maybe ask Michelle to maybe open up the quiz and for participants. So the quiz asks, DNSSEC protects the confidentiality of DNS data, true or false? So I'll give you maybe 20 seconds. Okay, so perhaps we could actually close the poll quiz.
One moment.
Right. So Michelle maybe you could actually display. So DNSSEC protects the confidentiality of DNS data. The actual answer is false. DNSSEC protects not the confidentiality, but the integrity of DNS data. Confidentiality is basically non-disclosure. You don't want to disclose what queries you're actually sending to an end to perhaps another party. So in this case here, you'll actually use DOH or DOT in order to protect DNS queries from actually a prying third party. However, DNSSEC does not provide that. Third party can still be able to see DNSSEC responses. So the answer is false. For those who got it, thank you so much. So yes, Joanne, you passed it. Okay, so let's move to the next section. And I'd like to welcome my colleague, Brian, to actually walk you through the takeaways and Q&As.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was all great information. Next slide, please. So just wanted to highlight some takeaways, some things in summary about what we both spoke about. Just some points of emphasis that hope we can all remember as we close today. So we talked a lot about how it takes, when it comes to combating DNS abuse and protecting end users, going back to the ICANN 73 statement from AFRALO. I think it's clear, and the whole ecosystem has a role to play. Everybody plays sort of unique roles in doing this, but one portion, which is what I concentrated on today, is our domain name holders, the registrants. They really have a role to play in combating DNS abuse, and they need to do it. To do that, they need to be responsible and vigilant and active domain name managers and administrators to ensure that the domain names that we're all accessing for different reasons in our lives are healthy and up to date and active and safe. So again, we emphasize that registrants, domain name holders, whoever's managing the domain name should be proactive, and they should be in communication with their registrars and know what to do if an issue should arise before something goes really bad. And a couple of points from Paul that we wanted to emphasize is that the DNS is still evolving, and it will always continue to evolve, and so are the security challenges. So I think it's our responsibility together as a whole community at ICANN to evolve along with these challenges, and to talk about them and to spread the word about best practices and a lot of things that Paul got into specifically. And that security is built into layers, and neither DNSSEC nor DOT or DOH will provide a catch-all for security. It takes again the entire new technologies, new ways of thinking, and it takes the entire ecosystem to really build security into the DNS. So those are our takeaways. I think you can go on to the next slide. And I think Paul we wanted to cover, something that's really important. It's something that whenever we as ICANN org staff, when we are making presentations to those, already in the ICANN community or outside of our community, we like to point to this great, platform that we have to learn more, which is called ICANN Learn. Paul, can you give a little bit more information on ICANN Learn?
Okay, sure. So, we actually offer free courses. ICANN actually offers free courses. You could actually register and sign up. And once you signed up, you go set your dashboard to your preferred language. So check out these three courses to begin with. So all that Brian has mentioned is actually, and you may be interested in doing this, is actually under 302.1, Registrant Basics. essentials for domain name holders. So that actually course will actually give you some very interesting information as your rights as a registrant, and also what you can do to also protect yourself on your domain. Then there is actually 400.1 cybersecurity basics on iCanLearn. You could also check it out. And then the 602.1 DNS fundamentals. You could actually go through the course. We are also working as the OCTO, the Office of the Chief Technology Office. We are also working on getting DNSSEC fundamentals onto iCanLearn. Once we're done with that, I think we'll actually, maybe there'll be a blog post on that. And at the same time, also on DNS abuse, we're also working on to get also DNS abuse and DNSSEC on iCanLearn, but this will be announced maybe down the road. Let's go also to the next slide. Finally, we'll also like you to check out one best practice guidebook, especially if you are interested in DNSSEC. So OCTO has published OCTO 029, DNSSEC Deployment Guidebook for CCTLDs. It's not just only for CCTLDs, but even you as an end user can gain some insight on how DNSSEC is. It's not technical, it's as such, we have included some technical content, but we made it also, Yazid and I drafted it in a way such that we are thinking of also a wider audience that can understand how DNSSEC functions, why it's important, and what they should consider if they're actually going to deploy DNSSEC in the infrastructure. Other than that, we also have various publications by the OCTO, and this ones can be found on the link that is also on the slide. My colleagues can share with you. So we have various publications, including on DNS over HTTPS and DNS over TLS, OCTO 003. 5G on alternative namespace-based systems. So all these publications, so you could go through them. They outline various views and also assessment that we as OCTO have actually conducted on some of these emerging technologies and existing ones as well. And please also feel free to drop us an email at octo@icon.org in case perhaps you're interested in DNSSEC hands-on training or specifically a technical discussion on some of the DNSSEC, DNS, or perhaps DOH or DOT. So you could drop us an email on that address. So no, maybe. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I am done with the presentation. So this is the Q&A portion. So the floor is all yours. Maybe Michelle, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you, Paul. We do have a hand up from Sarah Keaton. Sarah, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Sarah Keaton for the record. Thank you so much, Brian and Paul, for your rich presentations. I've definitely gained new knowledge today. So I have a question. On one of the slides, Paul mentioned that end users can request ISPs to turn on validation on their DNS resolvers. Before requesting the ISPs, how do I know that validation is turned on or off? I don't know if I missed this in the slides. And do you run trainings like this for ISPs from the African region? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll start with the last portion of the question, that will give you insights in order to answer the first portion of the question. So we actually are conducting, Yazid and I are conducting trainings with CCTLDs and also network operators on DNSSEC. So usually when we talk of DNSSEC validation, we actually walk them through a 4-day training on DNSSEC enabling the signing portion and also how you can enable validation. There are ways to do this. I cannot demonstrate now because I'll need to actually use a terminal and all. So there's a utility that is known as DIG, D-I-G. It's used so commonly by network for troubleshooting. Using the dig command, you can actually tell whether a resolver is actually conducting validation. So what happens is you issue the dig command and you request the resolver. Of course, you'll have to know the IP address of resolver. And then you send a query to it, like dig at maybe 8.8.8.8, icon.org. And the output from dig should give you perhaps the DNSSEC signatures, for example, and also it should give you certain flags. Given those flags, you're able to tell whether it is doing validation or it isn't. So that is how you can tell that. So if you actually ran the dig command, and you could then be able to provide an output to your ISP and tell them they're not doing DNSSEC validation. However, I think increasingly it's becoming common that ISPs who are deploying the more current software of maybe bind and bound, not DNS, all this are for another software because there are various vendors for DNS software. Increasingly, many of this software are doing validation by default. So you just install, you don't even need to really think about enabling it. It's just done automatically. So, but you can still use the dig command to troubleshoot and actually diagnose and figure out whether your service provider is actually doing DNSSEC validation. I hope that answers your question, Sarah. Oh, okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Paul. We have, this is Hadia for the record. Paul, we have a question from Judith. It says, is the training for CCTLDs available to all? How do CCTLDs or other domain operators request this training? Is it through you or through their local RIR?
Thank you, Judith, for the question. So basically, we get requests. Okay, so you drop us an email at octo@icon.org, and then after that, we get in touch with you. We are actually a team of my colleagues. We are 7 of us, so we're in different regions. Whether in APAC, we have Champika. In Africa, it's me and Yazid. In Latin America, it's Nicholas. In North America, it's David Huberman, and also Europe. North America and Europe. And so basically you just drop an email at octo@icon.org, get in touch with you, and then we organize a session. And during that, we'll walk you through our hands-on lab. So during the pandemic, because we couldn't travel as staff, we developed a cloud lab. And using the cloud lab, we now give access to the cloud lab to trainees who then practice signing a domain, validating. For most of the time, our requests have been from CCTLDs in Africa. That is from my experience with Yazid. We've got more requests from CCTLDs in the continent, but we also get from network operators. So we've been dealing with those 2 constituencies or stakeholders most of the time, Judith.
Okay, Megan is saying, given how much DNS abuse has featured prominently in previous ICANN public meetings, the course should really be fast-tracked on the learning platform. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. So basically, it's in the pipeline. Okay, I'll work hand in hand with ICANN Yes, we'll try our best to get it published. Hope very soon. I will not give you a specific date, but but I think once we get it published, I think it will be maybe the I Can Learn team will be able to maybe announce it on maybe a blog post or so. So that's something we're working on the pipeline. So for now, I cannot give you a definite date on when it will actually be published.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. I don't see any hands up and no more questions in the chat. So Brian, you focused on registrants and what they need to do to protect their domain names. You talked about domain name management and best practices. Paul, you gave a great summary about the technical aspects and very beneficial tips to operators and technical people. But I would say that many of the tips provided in the webinar are helpful and useful also for end users when going online. It helps them avoid falling victims to different DNS abuse forms. Thank you for this very informative session. It is actually beneficial to all stakeholders. Again, let's see if anyone has, if we have more questions or maybe questions in the chat or comments. I don't see any. Paul, Brian, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I don't have anything else, but I guess, again, thank you so much for having me, for having Paul and Yazid. This was great. And we're always available. We love to engage with everybody in the community. Thanks for taking some time out of many of you, your evenings to be with us. And, for those who are accessing this information, later on via the recording, thank you for being here as well. Thank you to our interpreters and all the slides that we showed today with links to additional information can be found on the wiki page. And we look forward to engaging further on this sort of ongoing discussion about privacy and data protection, about DNS abuse and any of these topics that you are interested in. So thank you very much. Paul, I don't know, anything else to say?
Yeah, thank you. But there's one thing in the chat. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but and it's for Paul. It says, doesn't public key cryptography provide encryption? Paul mentioned in his presentation that DNSSEC does not provide encryption, but it uses public key cryptography. Paul, would you like to comment on that?
Oh, so I said in the presentation, DNSSEC does not provide confidentiality, provides integrity. It does use public key encryption, DNSSEC. It's also the same technology that's used by HTTPS, the lock on your browser. It's the same technology. It's just that it works differently. So public key encryption on HTTPS actually tries to secure the session between your browser and the server that you're connecting to, and you're sending a domain, a query to it. But in the DNS, DNSSEC uses public key encryption to sign. So it's actually to provide digital signatures to DNS data. And these signatures can be checked from the root zone going to the bottom layers of the DNS hierarchy. So that's the only difference, is that it's applied differently for different purposes. But it's just that DNSSEC does not provide confidentiality.
Thank you, Paul, for that. And I must say that Yazid also provided an answer in the chat. So any final words from your side?
Okay, I'll just say thank you for your for having us, and also for the questions. And for those of you who like maybe a training, perhaps on DNSSEC, please drop us an email at octo@icon.org. We've also worked with different stakeholders, but we still welcome more. So just drop us an email at octo@icon.org.
Thank you so much.
ICANN 74 is right around the corner, as you all know. So, you know, if register today, and a lot of these topics will be discussed more and at length there at that meeting, the hybrid meeting. So look forward to seeing you all online or in person sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Hadia. I just wanted to say thank you, Hadia, for the great moderation, and our speakers today, Paul, Brian, and Yazid also, who was assisting and putting interesting links. All the links are also posted on today's meeting page for you. The recording will be posted shortly, and we will be organizing more webinars, more to come after ICANN 74. So stay tuned for that.